In 612 BCE, Nineveh, a city in northern Mesopotamia that was once the most powerful in the world, was ablaze. The armies of the Medes, Babylonians, and their allies had breached the city walls. Flames from the palace towers were licking the sky. Soldiers stormed King Ashurbanipal's palace and began destroying everything that might serve as a reminder of Assyria: statues, wall murals, and a room housing thousands of clay tablets. Little did those soldiers know that instead of erasing history, they were actually preserving it forever. Those clay tablets, inscribed with millennia-old knowledge, hardened like stone in the intense heat of the fire. The very fire meant to destroy them ended up preserving them safely underground for the next 2,500 years. When archaeologists began excavating Nineveh in the 19th century, they discovered over 30,000 tablets, records of law, medicine, astronomy, poetry, and the world's oldest epic tales, all of which had survived the flames intact. This is not merely the story of a single city or empire. It is the story of the civilization that first taught humanity how to build cities, write, establish laws, and divide time into hours and minutes. This is the story of Mesopotamia, the land situated between two rivers that laid the foundations of modern civilization. The word Mesopotamia originates from Greek and means the land between two rivers. These two rivers were the Tigris and the Euphrates. Today, this region lies primarily within Iraq, though it also extends into parts of Syria and Turkey. Historians consider this area part of the Fertile Crescent. However, there was a paradox here. These rivers were not as reliable as Egypt's Nile. The flow of the Tigris and Euphrates was erratic. At times there were sudden, devastating floods, while at others, prolonged droughts occurred. The people who settled here had to learn to control nature, rather than simply relying on it. They dug canals, built dams, and devised methods to channel water to their fields. This very necessity eventually gave rise to complex systems of organization, cooperation, and authority. It is a recurring irony in the story of Mesopotamia that the region's greatest challenges became its greatest strengths. Around 5000 BCE, in the region of southern Mesopotamia, known to historians as Sumer, small villages gradually began to grow. It was here that one of the greatest revolutions in human history began: the birth of cities. Eridu, Uruk, Kish, Lagash, Nippur. These names may seem unfamiliar today, but they were the world's first true cities. The city of Uruk holds a special place in this story. Around 3500 BCE, Uruk was likely the largest city in the world, with a population numbering in the thousands. Its tallest structures were known as ziggurats, stepped towers built from mud bricks that served as temples for the gods. These temples were not merely places of worship, they were also the hubs of the city's entire economy. Grain was stored, distributed, and accounted for here, and it was from this very setting that one of the greatest discoveries in human history emerged. Around 3300 BCE, the Sumerians began making marks on clay tablets to keep records. Initially, these symbols were pictorial. An image of an ox represented an ox, and an image of a stalk of grain represented grain. Gradually, these symbols became simplified and were inscribed onto the clay using a reed stylus to create wedge-shaped marks. Historians call this cuneiform, meaning a wedge-shaped script. It was the world's first written language. Consider the significance of this. Until then, human knowledge relied solely on memory and oral tradition. Knowledge was passed from one generation to the next through conversation, a process where details could easily change or be lost. With the advent of writing, humans could, for the first time, permanently record their thoughts, laws, and stories on clay. Civilization no longer had to rely on memory alone. Along with writing, new discoveries were also taking place in the Sumerian civilization. The use of the wheel, whose initial glimpse is found in the potter's wheel used for making clay pots, and which soon began to be used in vehicles as well. Bronze tools, which changed both farming and warfare. And mathematics, the Sumerian people created a system of numbers that was based on 60. This is the reason why even today our clocks have 60 minutes in an hour, and 60 seconds in a minute. This heritage has been coming down from Mesopotamia thousands of years ago. Next time you look at a clock, remember that you are looking at a mathematical system that is 5,000 years old. Sumer wasn't a single empire, it was actually a network of different city-states that would trade with each other one minute and go to war the next. Every single city had its own king, its own gods, and its own army. This was the era when tales of rulers like Gilgamesh started to be born, a king of Uruk, whose heroic stories were later written down as the Epic of Gilgamesh. Historians believe that Gilgamesh was probably a real king who ruled over Uruk around 2700 BCE, but over time, his stories got completely mixed up with myth and reality. This epic is still counted among the oldest and greatest literary works in the world, a story about friendship, the fear of death, and the quest for immortality. These themes still feel just as true today as they did thousands of years ago. But this era of city-states was not going to last forever. Around 2330 BCE, a man rose in Middle Mesopotamia whose name was going to change history: Sargon. According to stories, Sargon's birth was not ordinary. He was set adrift in a basket in a river, and a gardener raised him. Sargon later reached a key position in the court of the king of Kish, and then he seized power himself. Sargon began conquering Sumerian city-states one by one: Ur, Uruk, Lagish, Umma. He brought all of them under his control. But Sargon did not stop there. He also sent his armies beyond the borders of Mesopotamia, towards parts of modern-day Syria, Turkey, and Iran. The result was that Sargon established the first true empire in human history, the Akkadian Empire. This was not a collection of different city-states, but a vast territory operating under a central authority, whose capital was the city of Akkad, whose exact location archaeologists have still not been able to find. The empire reached its zenith around 2250 BCE, during the reign of Sargon's grandson, Naram-Sin. However, it soon began to crumble under the weight of internal rebellions and external invasions. By approximately 2100 BCE, the Akkadian Empire had disintegrated, yet it had set a precedent. Every Mesopotamian ruler now knew that governing the entire region as a single entity was possible, and all aspired to replicate that feat. Following the collapse of the Akkadian Empire, the city of Ur rose to prominence once again. The third dynasty of Ur, which spanned from approximately 2112 BCE to 2004 BCE, succeeded in uniting a vast portion of Mesopotamia under a single rule. Administration became highly organized during this era. Systems for tax collection, the practice of maintaining government records, and legal frameworks all matured during this period. Yet this empire, too, could not endure indefinitely. Elamite invaders attacked Ur, while nomadic tribes known as the Amorites gradually began settling in Mesopotamia. A family from one of these Amorite tribes seized control of a small city named Babylon. Initially, it was a modest city, but in 1792 BCE, a king ascended the throne who would be forever etched in history: Hammurabi. Over a reign spanning more than 40 years, Hammurabi gradually brought all of southern Mesopotamia under his control, employing both diplomacy and warfare. However, what immortalized Hammurabi in history was not his conquests, but a code of law inscribed on a stone stela, the Code of Hammurabi. This code comprised approximately 300 clauses, outlining rules to resolve disputes related to theft, murder, trade, property, and family matters. Its most famous principle was an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, meaning the punishment had to be commensurate with the crime. It was one of the world's oldest and most comprehensive written legal codes, although smaller collections of laws, such as that of Ur-Nammu, had existed previously. Interestingly, the law did not apply equally to everyone. The punishment depended on the social class of both the victim and the offender. The penalty for harming a noble was far more severe than that for harming a slave. While this concept of justice might seem flawed by modern standards, it was revolutionary for that era. Written rules now prevailed over the king's arbitrary will. Shortly after Hammurabi's death, his empire began to weaken. Around 1595 BCE, the Hittites raided and looted Babylon. Subsequently, a people known as the Kassites seized control of Babylon, ruling there for more than 400 years. While Babylon was weakening in the south, a new power was emerging in northern Mesopotamia: Assyria. The Assyrians settled along the banks of the Tigris River, with Assur serving as their principal city. Assyrian civilization was defined by its military might. The Assyrian army was the most organized, ruthless, and effective military machine of that era. They made extensive use of iron weapons, siege engines, and war chariots. Assyrian kings often employed extremely brutal methods following their victories. Punishments such as burning down rebellious cities, forcibly relocating thousands of people, and flaying enemy kings alive were depicted on walls to ensure the rest of the world would not even contemplate rebellion out of fear. This was a politics of fear, and it remained effective for centuries. Between the 9th and 7th centuries BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire brought Mesopotamia, Syria, Israel, and even parts of Egypt under its dominion. It was the largest empire the world had seen up to that time. Nineveh, a vast, prosperous, and magnificent city, became the capital of this empire. One of the last great kings of the Assyrian Empire was Ashurbanipal, who reigned from approximately 668 to 631 BCE. Ashurbanipal was a man of contradictions. On one hand, he was a ruthless warrior, known for hunting lions and crushing enemies in battle. On the other, he considered himself a scholar. In one of his inscriptions, he proudly wrote that he had mastered the wisdom of ancient sages, could interpret celestial and earthly omens, and could discuss them in the assembly of scholars. He was perhaps the only Assyrian king who was literate. Ashurbanipal ordered the collection of thousands of clay tablets from across his kingdom, from the temples of Babylon and the archives of Borsippa. The result was the Great Library of Nineveh. It was a collection of thousands of documents covering law, medicine, astrology, sorcery, history, and literature. A repository that historians regard as the world's first systematically organized library, even though smaller libraries had existed earlier in Sumer, Akkad, and Babylon. It was here that the most complete version of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the one we read today, was discovered. However, Assyria's might had also created a long line of enemies against it. Following Ashurbanipal's death, internal turmoil engulfed the empire. Nabopolassar, the king of Babylon, rebelled against Assyria and formed an alliance with Cyaxares, the king of Media. In 612 BCE, their combined forces besieged Nineveh and breached the city walls. Nineveh was completely destroyed. Sin-shar-ishkun, the last king of the Assyrian Empire, was killed in this battle. Although another Assyrian general, Ashurbanipal II, managed to escape and attempted for some time to revive the empire, he was unsuccessful. The Assyrian Empire, which had dominated Mesopotamia for centuries, was almost completely erased from history. It was then that the event we witnessed at the beginning of this story took place. The palace at Nineveh was set ablaze in an attempt to obliterate the memory of Assyria forever. Yet that very fire baked and hardened the thousands of clay tablets in Ashurbanipal's library, preserving them safely underground for 2.5 millennia, until archaeologists unearthed them in the 19th century. Following the fall of Assyria, Babylon once again became the center of Mesopotamia. Nabopolassar's son, Nebuchadnezzar II, reigned from 605 to 562 BCE, and under his rule, Babylon reached the pinnacle of its splendor. Nebuchadnezzar adorned the city with magnificent walls, temples, and palaces. It was during this period that the Ishtar Gate was constructed, a massive entrance made of gleaming blue bricks, featuring reliefs of lions, dragons, and bulls. A large section of it can be seen today at the Pergamon Museum in Berlin. Then there are the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, counted among the 7 wonders of the ancient world. However, a crucial fact must be noted. There is no direct mention of these gardens in any Babylonian inscription, nor have modern archaeologists found concrete evidence of their existence in Babylon. Some historians believe that these gardens were actually built in the Assyrian city of Nineveh during the reign of King Sennacherib, and that the story became associated with Babylon over time. This serves as a reminder that the boundary between history and legend is not always clearly defined. Another major event occurred during the reign of Nebuchadnezzar, one that is also recorded in the Bible, namely the invasion of Jerusalem and the taking of the Jewish people into captivity in Babylon, an event known as the Babylonian captivity. However, following Nebuchadnezzar's death, power in Babylon changed hands rapidly, and political instability mounted. Meanwhile, a new power was emerging in the east, Persia, led by Cyrus the Great. In 539 BCE, the armies of Cyrus marched towards Babylon. It is said that Cyrus's forces diverted the flow of the Euphrates River, allowing soldiers to enter the city along the riverbed where the water level had dropped. The fall of Babylon did not occur through a bloody battle, but rather with almost no significant resistance. According to some ancient sources, the people within Babylon were so resentful of their unpopular king, Nabonidus, that they welcomed Cyrus. This event in 539 BCE marked the end of an era. For 3,000 years, the Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, and Assyrians had successively ruled Mesopotamia as its indigenous peoples. With Cyrus's conquest, this period came to a permanent end. Mesopotamia then passed into Persian hands, subsequently falling under the dominion of Alexander the Great, followed by the Greek and Parthian empires. So, what legacy did Mesopotamia leave us? First and foremost is the art of writing itself, the cuneiform script, which made it possible to carry human knowledge across time. Then there is the concept of law. The Code of Hammurabi introduced the idea that written rules, rather than a ruler's whims, should govern, a principle that remains the foundation of every modern legal system. Mesopotamian contributions to mathematics and astronomy are still present in our daily lives, such as the base 60 number system, which gives us 60 minutes in an hour and 360 degrees in a circle. Sumerian and Babylonian astronomers recorded the movements of stars and planets over years, laying the groundwork for early concepts of the zodiac and the calendar. And then there is the Epic of Gilgamesh, one of the oldest major literary works in human history, which grapples with themes like the fear of death, friendship, and the quest for immortality, much like the stories of today. It serves as a reminder that people 5,000 years ago were asking the very same questions we ask today. Today, those Mesopotamian cities, Ur, Uruk, Babylon, Nineveh, are merely ruins buried in dust. Yet their legacy has not crumbled. Every time you check the time, every time a court delivers a verdict based on written law, and every time a story speaks of friendship and the fear of death, that ancient civilization, born between two rivers, lives on. Perhaps this is the greatest irony. A civilization built upon mud bricks endures in our world today, far more firmly than palaces of stone. If you enjoyed this story about Mesopotamia, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so we can keep bringing you more fascinating stories from history.